The way that cultural evolution works is we all have certain mindsets, right? So every human has optimism and pessimism, right? But for example, we talked about Americans earlier, right? And how outsiders see Americans. And Americans are, historically massively optimistic. Even Alexis de Tocqueville, when he came here, right, a French guy comes here, he's like, Americans are so optimistic. What is up with that, right?
That's why we kick ass, son.
Well, but it is. I mean, honestly, like because their optimism has certain benefits, which is that it makes you super productive, right? Super happy. And these have always been a large part of what American success is about. But optimism does have a problem, which is that optimism has a tendency to make you delusional, right?
That's a problem.
That's a problem. And so if you look at what is the most optimistic group of humans on the planet, it's actors in Los Angeles, right?
Are they really the most optimistic, you think?
Well, I think the people who are, to move to LA, right, you have to really believe that out of all the people in the world that somehow you're going to make it, right? So optimism is what attracts people out here. But then what happens is that a lot of them end up sort of sitting in optimism, right? They're always sitting there and being like, I'm going to get discovered. I'm going to get discovered. I'm going to win the lottery, right? Essentially, it's that sort of mindset. And then they're just waiting for things to happen. They don't have an actual plan for going about it. That's obviously not true of all actors. Some people are like, man, okay, I'm out here now. If I'm going to make it, I need to hustle. I need to do things. I need to do all that sort of stuff. But there is that trajectory for actors who come out here hoping they're going to get discovered, are waiting to be discovered for 40, 50 years, and then like, oh shit, I'm 70. And then they crash, and then, they become the super depressed, cynical actors who sit around like, being like, fuck the industry. The industry's the fucking worst.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, we've all met those.
Exactly.
Those people are rough to be around.
They are rough to be around.
They just spit it out. It's all negative. It's like coming out of them like a sprinkler system.
And that is where a lot of middle America is right now, because they've had this hope of the American dream, the American dream, the American dream, the American dream. And then there's those hopes have been crushed, right? It hasn't delivered. It hasn't panned out the way that it was supposed to. And so you're seeing a lot of pessimism, and which is the opposite side. And pessimism has certain strengths. And the strengths of pessimism, it's that constructive paranoia we talked about that they practice in Papua New Guinea, which is that you're super alive to threats. But you're actually so alive to threats that you see threats that aren't even there, right? You're paranoid.
Right.
But the problem is that it also comes with substance abuse. So you find that, for example, what's happened in Middle America is there's a lot of substance abuse going on all of these opioid addictions, all of that sort of stuff.
Right, but don't you think that's a function of being exposed to those things as much as it's a function of the society that we live in? Those things are super dangerous to be exposed to. And because of these corporations that we were talking about that constantly want to up their bottom line, they're selling these things and they're pushing them on doctors. So that could be as much as of the cause of despair as a symptom of the issue.
Well,
right? Wouldn't it?
Of course,
Right.
That's a factor. But at the same time, look at Russia, right? Russia is a place that is famous for substance abuse, right? 30.5% of Russians die from alcohol-related causes. And that's as compared to, say, 3% in America. Right? So 10 times as many Russians are dying from alcohol-related causes, right? And they drink fucking anything, right? Like, they pieneer weird fucking drugs like crocodile that are just like fucking gnarly.
Skin rotting shit.
Yeah, exactly.
Remember that? You'd see their exposed bones.
And there periodically there's all this weird stuff that happens in Russia where, for example, they'll drink like, some weird detergent, some Glade plug-in or something like that because there's a tiny bit of alcohol in it, right? So there's a certain psychology that comes with that massive pessimism. And that massive pessimism evolved because of the context of Russian history, right? So Russian history, if you ever want to truly be depressed, just read some Russian history. Right? That'll do it for you. And you find that, Russia has always been a meat grinder, right? It just chews people up, it spits them out. And so the way that you survive in that environment is being massively paranoid, right? The winter will kill you, right? The leadership will kill you. There's all sorts of things that'll kill you. And so the Eastern European mindset tends towards this massive, massive pessimism. And the pessimism is useful in the same way that it is for the Papua New Guineans, where you're massively alive to possible threats. But it sets up these problems. And the problems that it sets up are substance abuse, and it also sets up the problem of sort of anticipating threats that aren't actually there.
And just overall despair.
Yep. And so what ends up happening is that there's then the problem that pessimists and optimists misunderstand each other, right? They don't get each other, right? The optimist is like, you're just fucking depressing and, you know, sort of see threats that aren't there and like your life sucks. And the pessimist looks at the optimist and is like, you're fucking delusional, dude. Like, you got to get real. You got to understand how things really work. So if you look at what happens in Russian and American relations, what happens is that you'll have the same situation, but interpreted in two totally different ways. So after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the United States made some sort of promise or some sort of intimation that it would not expand NATO any further east. And the Russians took that as, okay, you're not expanding NATO any further east, right? But in fact, what ended up happening is that the United States and the West and its sort of oblivious hopefulness is like, let's keep expanding NATO, right? They didn't take this comment very seriously, and they moved NATO all the way to Estonia, all the way to the Russian border. Now, the Russians sitting on their side interpret that as a violation of the promise. So sitting there as the pessimists that they are, they're tracking each of these moves. They're like, oh, okay, you're moving another country over. You're moving another country over. We see what you're doing. And that's a lot of what the tension that boiled up between Russia and America was about.